Hey, so this is the Drunkalogs, a podcast about addiction and recovery in which each guest shares their version of how it was, what happened, and how it is now, and then endures a half-hour Q&A at the hands of your host, Nick Morton. My next guest is a childhood friend who grew up with me in the same bucolic stretch of Long Island's Gold Coast, where the Great Gatsby was set. It is a world of country clubs and cocktail parties where the descendants of some of America's great industrial titans still exercise an iron grip over an archaic set of norms and ideals. Growing up, I saw a lot of myself in him, with one foot in and one foot out of this world, uneasy with its snobbery and privilege, yet still spurred by ambition towards some kind of achievement. I've thought a lot about him over the years, about how our paths diverged and how, in different circumstances, I might have followed a similar course, and how my life, I am sure, would be better. And yet here we are at the midpoint of our lives, both sober and debating what it means to be Christian and what it means to believe in God. I enjoyed this conversation immensely. Won't you please welcome James McLain. Do you go to meetings?
No.
Did you ever?
No.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
And that's actually another interesting facet of the story is I don't go to AA, but I had counseling and I had therapy.
Right. Well, cool.
Which was really just a different route.
And how long have you been sober?
Since 2001.
Nice. Oh, wow. That's a long time.
And I'm going to tell you the whole story.
Yeah.
And you are a character. You're a character in the story.
I'm dreading it.
It's all good.
It's great to see you. It has been one of the great things of this podcast of just getting in touch with people and then actually having the sort of excuse of having a long involved conversation with them. So, it's like, if we weren't going to do this, it's like we could have been like, yeah, let's catch up. And will we ever catch up? What's and then you have some polite conversation and who's interested in that?
No, this way we can get into it.
Get into
the muck.
We met, you came to Greenvale, our elementary school, in what year?
Fifth grade.
Which grade?
In fifth grade. I think it was 1980.
And where were you in school before that?
Well, I had lived, I lived in Manhasset, and then we moved out to Locust Valley when I was about 10, maybe I was 8 years old, and then the Locust Valley Public School for a year, and then I transferred to Greenville.
And why'd your parents move from Manhasset just to get more
Well,
country?
This is the whole story. I mean, we got to talk about Locust Valley. I mean, Locust Valley.
Yeah, no, totally. That's
Locust Valley is, it's home of Locust Valley Lockjaw. Some of the most prominent families that sort of built, this country, the Vanderbilts, JP Morgan. I mean, you know all this. I mean, this is not your average town. And, frankly, my dad was kind of an ambitious guy, and, he was very enamored with that life.
Sure.
I mean, we were just sort of middle class, Irish Catholics, and my dad sort of got it in his head that he wanted to be part of that life, you know, and it's beautiful out there, and it's sort of socially prestigious. And so, my parents sort of wanted to be, part of that. And
it's funny. I feel like Locust Valley was so small and so snobbish, and there was very little opportunity to, live your own life there. It was like you either lived on the terms, or it seems to me now looking at it, like you either lived on the terms of that sort of old guard snobbishness and tried to play that game, or you lived somewhere else.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, it was a very strict, rigid code. People, played golf and tennis on the weekends and drank like fish, and it was all old money.
And what was it like for you coming into, particularly our class at Greenville School, which was the richest, cliquiest, snobbiest class. I don't think there's probably anything that quite compares to, maybe, but it seemed that way. Your sister was there too. You have her class for comparison, but what was that like for you?
Well, I'll tell you, to put it in context, some of our classmates that, their parents owned the local sports teams.
Right. Totally.
You know, I mean, this
All
is all of them. So, you know, but frankly, I was an insider, but I was also an outsider.
Right.
And that can, as you know, I mean, that can give you a lot of power. You know, it
Sure.
forms your identity. So for example, my parents, you know, we were not part of piping. So
Right.
we were outsiders.
Yeah.
And that kind of fueled me. And frankly, Nikki, I go back to Nikki.
Yeah.
You know,
Sure.
like you and I were this is where I start talking out of school. We were the smartest kids in the class.
Yeah.
Or we
totally.
had, you know, it was like you, me, and Ezra had the highest grades.
Totally.
And that was a thing. And that was great. And it gave you sort of power. And you know, so I sort of decided, like, you know, when the kids started drinking in sort of 8th and 9th grade, that's when I remember it starting to happen. Like, you'd have these parties, and I wasn't even going to the parties, and it sort of became my identity. Like, I'm going to be a straight arrow. I'm not going to be part of this, and I'm going to be this and that. You know,
it's interesting because you and I were really good friends for a lot of those years, and you know, like, I remember spending time at your house with your parents, and like you coming to our house. And I mean, obviously, you know, we were both the smartest kids in the class. So there was that, like, or at least the smartest boys, because there were some smart girls too. And, so like, I always felt a kinship with you. And, you know, and I sort of had one foot in I had 1 foot deep in the center of that world, and then 1 foot a little bit outside it, in part because my parents had like gotten divorced and remarried. And there was a whole half the town that for which I was a pariah, you know, and my family was a pariah, and then whatever. But then, like, I was partying very much in 8th and 9th grade. And, I mean, I don't remember those parties being more than a handful of people where we really got out of control. But then we also had this like other group with like Justine and Lily and Nicole, the mellows for compatible fellows, which was like not a real thing, but by the same token, it was this like other friend group that was sort of, you know, again, had like, I mean, you know, Lily is Lily Phipps. I mean, it doesn't get sort of more blue blood than that, but, you know, still sort of 1 foot in that world and 1 foot trying to be somewhere else.
I mean, look, in the long run, what it really, you know, what it makes me think of is like, I think it made us all kind of verbally tough, in the sense that like we were constantly giving it to each other.
Totally.
You know, and so like when I got like, so I, you know, we all went off to boarding school. You went to St. Paul's, I went to Andover, and like no one ever messed with me after Greenville, like ever. Because I, you know, like dealing with you and George Raby, and you know, we would just be giving it to each other, like ostracizing each other and sarcasm and this and that. And like, and even now, like I live in Bronxville, which is, you know, an affluent suburb of New York City. And it's so funny because people are like, well, don't you find Bronxville to be a really snobby town? And I'm like, no, like that's a hard no.
Right.
You know, because like, I don't think there's any snobbery that exists that's more ultra than Locust Valley.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. I mean, it's one of the things I loved about LA is like nobody ever cared where I was from or like who my parents were, where I went to school or anything.
Yeah. And so I think it made me resilient. It made me, you know, kind of confident. Also like not afraid to sort of stand apart from the crowd.
Right.
You know? And frankly, so I didn't drink all the way through Andover. I mean, like there was partying going on, but I wasn't really heavily involved in it. I mean, I wasn't really involved in it at all. I really only started drinking when I got to college. So I was a holdout.
Right.
And I was like, you know,
How was Andover?
Oh, I loved it.
Yeah.
I loved it. I mean, it was you know, it's a relatively big school. There were like 1,200 students, and there was no in crowd. There was no out crowd. There were just, you know, you could be whatever. You know, I played squash there. I loved it. I loved, you know, just met interesting kids.
Right.
Wasn't homesick. And, you know, that's the other thing, Nick, is like, when I think back about Greenville, like it was also the 80s, and it was like, things were not always peaceful in my house,
Right.
either. I mean, my
Sure.
parents stayed together.
Right.
My parents stayed married, but it's like, I think in the 80s, like every family either was divorced or like lived under the shadow of potential divorce.
Yeah, it's weird. Like my kids, like there aren't a lot of, like most of my kids' family friends are together. Like it's so different. Like every family we were growing up with was in the midst of falling apart.
Well, I don't know. I think it was sort of the times when everyone was like, hey, I'm just not happy, man. I just, it's like, what are
Right.
you talking about? And I think over the years, I think we've all realized like how high the costs are,
Right. Yeah, totally.
financial and otherwise.
Yeah, certainly. It's funny. I mean, I partied so hard through boarding school. Sometimes I wonder like what what it might have been like. Like what might I have gotten out of my access to that elite institution had I taken it more seriously?
Well, I don't know. I mean, that's the thing. I mean, I've listened to your podcast. I think sometimes you're a little hard on yourself, like, I mean,
Thanks.
really, you know, um, but, and I've been thinking about that a lot. It's like, because I was so grateful for the opportunity to go to a school like Andover,
Right.
because I was like, who the hell am I? I'm
Right.
just this ordinary, like I get to go here. Like, this is unbelievable. And,
Right.
the other thing layered into that is like, I was always very grateful to my parents. I mean,
Right.
even though my parents were not perfect people, and my dad had, a lot of problems, and, but I was always just so grateful for that opportunity, partly because like my dad's father died when my dad was really young, when he was
Right.
18.
Right.
And, my father went to the Air Force Academy, and, then he had to come home. He transferred to Colgate because he had to take care of his mother. And he was like, looking after his younger sisters. And, he had sort of a hard childhood, and I always
Right.
just sort of thought like, I better like make the most of this.
Right. That's great. Were they drinkers?
Yeah. My mother, not so much.
Right.
Yeah.
But everyone back then was drinkers. I mean, pretty much.
My mother wasn't really much of a drinker, but
Right.
my father was he drank.
Right. Right.
He drank.
And so, so where'd you go after Andover?
So I went to Williams.
Right. How big is Williams?
2,000 students. And it's like, then the dam broke for me. Like I had been a holdout, like, no, I'm going to be a straight arrow, study hard, all this stuff. And then I got to Williams. It's just like everyone was constantly drinking. And
Right.
It's like, it's out in the mountains. It's out in the snow. There's really nothing to do. And the people just drank. Like there were keg parties all the time.
Was the culture at Andover, was it anti-party or no? There was just enough kids that like it didn't feel like, I mean, St. Paul's, I feel like it was small enough that like the druggies ran the place, and it was like either you were going to be part of that or like you were going to be a nerd. And I was like, well, I'm going to run the place,
It sounds like you did.
I mean, it was great. I had a great time there. My wife had a less good time there, but and I think that's partly just like, it is like a school that definitely like favors boys over girls, and like, I don't know. It was, and because there was so little supervision, like they gave you so much rope. It was a miracle that you didn't like hang yourself, so if you could sort of survive, it was great. But if you were struggling, it was really, I think it became like a downward spiral really quickly for a lot of people. So
yeah, as most of the schools are. I mean, so the school was big enough that like there was drinking going on, there was, pot smoking, but it was big enough that you didn't have to be part of it if you didn't want to.
And so Williams is like you're out in the countryside, and it's and then you've got all these people who are away from home for the first time and just like so psyched to just like tear it up.
But it's such a protected environment. I mean, like you have just such guardrails, like you can do anything.
Right.
Because you're in this little small town. Like the worst that's going to happen is like, often I would like lose my keys in the snow.
That sucks.
You're like stumbling home from a party, you drop your keys, and like you don't find them until March.
That's
But,
amazing.
I mean, it was all just beer drinking.
Right.
And I was on the squash team, and your body, you're so young, you can handle
Yeah.
anything.
Yeah. It's true.
So, and we would do these stupid things like Hour of Power. You know what that is? It's like,
No.
well, it's like you do a shot, or no, it's Century Club, which is a shot of beer every minute for 100 minutes, which
Right.
is basically like drinking 12 beers in an hour and a half.
Right. Yeah. That's
And,
about right.
you just stumble out blind drunk into the snow and you throw up, and then, you're fine.
Right. And so there were like, I'm assuming that through college there were basically no real consequences. No, it's just
No.
like, it's a good time. And are you enjoying it, or are you like remorseful about it, or?
No, I was loving it. And frankly, I mean, I was trying to think about like the reasons why I drank and all that. And it's like, and as I said before, it really wasn't like to fit in.
Right.
It wasn't like I was socially nervous and I just, needed to, it was just to have a good time.
Right.
And a sense of freedom. And, it was all good back then. I mean, but that, you're laying down the tracks for a future problem.
Sure. Yeah. It's terrifying.
And there's always some guy in college who's like worse than you,
Right.
So you're like, well, I'm fine. I mean, I don't drink, first thing in the morning,
Right.
Or like, I'm not the one passed out, in the pool of vomit. But everything about drinking in a liberal arts college is, pathological.
What do you mean?
Well, I mean, just the level of consumption.
Oh yeah, totally.
Is not.
I mean, the thing
normal.
is, I drank less in college than I did in boarding school, like, or in a different way, like, because boarding school, it was intense and it was secretive. So you'd be like, all right, we're gonna sit around this like thing, and you just pound shots. You'd like get 8 shots in your body as quickly as you could, and then stash the bottle, and then you're like,
right.
Whoa.
Yeah.
So,
no, in college, yeah.
But I did, like, I mean, then you get to college and you see everyone. I mean, everyone else is just, I mean, it is pathological.
Well, and then you look at other guys and they'd be like doing something called case day. And case day is basically you walk around carrying a case of beer and you try to drink the whole thing in 24 hours.
Right.
Which is not a very sophisticated game.
Right.
But you got to kind of admire, it's sort of elegant in its simplicity.
Yeah. Very basic.
But it's like, I'm not doing that, so I'm fine.
Yeah. And so then what happened? So what do you study in Williams?
So I was a philosophy major.
Right. Interesting.
Just because I thought it was interesting and I like to argue with people, and that was all great. And then, but I also thought, Wall Street was interesting.
Right.
And the people I sort of could identify with were all, going off, getting jobs as analysts, and that kind of appealed to me. And so, I went off and did that.
Was it hard to get an analyst job when you have a philosophy degree?
Oh yeah.
Really?
Yeah. It was hard. Yeah.
Where'd you start?
I got a summer job at a brokerage firm.
Right.
Sort of begging.
Where?
Well, gosh,
in the city, or like?
Pardon?
In New York City?
Yeah. No, it doesn't exist anymore. It was just sort of a guy's, personal trading desk.
Right. And like, and was that before you graduated from college, or was that sort of like, right after?
No, after college.
Right after.
Yeah.
College.
No, I graduated, did not have a job, moved back home for a couple months, and
in LV.
Yeah.
I was there. It turns out there were a lot of people there that summer, and I wasn't invited to do anything. I just sat around my father's house taking care of his dogs. There was very little air conditioning in that house, and I think I sat by myself and just masturbated compulsively all summer long. It was like, I gotta go to I'm supposed to be trying to figure out how to get to Hollywood. Jeez. Oh, that sounds horrible.
No, you should have joined us. Well, I mean, that's when I was, going to Buckram's all the time.
Yeah, I was not. I don't think I was there very much.
And, I mean, in terms of the the bad things that I did. I mean, we certainly drove under the influence,
right,
but again, another protected environment,
right. Like, what's the worst that's going to happen? They're going to be like, Mr. McLain, we'd like to take you back to your house now.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, unless
you
you
could
like
have hurt
get in an
someone, you could have hurt
accident or
yourself.
hurt someone. Yeah, totally.
But by the grace of God, I never, I escaped all those consequences.
Did you have would you go back to Locust Valley in the summers, like during college? Would you have jobs, or what would you generally do?
Nothing. I mean, I had sort of trivial summer jobs. Like I actually taught tennis at Sewanaka.
Oh, nice. I didn't know they had tennis courts.
Well, they had 2 tennis courts, and the kids were getting bored of sailing, so I gave some tennis lessons there.
Anyway, you're at this brokerage firm. Are you living in the city at that point, or are you commuting from Locust Valley into the city?
I was commuting into the city. Then I got a job, a real job as an analyst at Smith Barney.
Right. And what was that like?
I mean, I was totally unqualified.
Right.
Had never seen a balance sheet before I started. It was a very steep learning curve. I'm like competing against all the Wharton undergrads.
Right.
So I wasn't really the best analyst, but
right.
I kind of figured it out by the end of my 2 years.
And do they have any kind of mentorship in that position, or you're just kind of left to sink or swim?
I mean, there was a tiny bit of training, but it was
right.
pretty much all on the job.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And then that, so that was a 2-year job. And then, so I applied to business school because I felt like I needed an academic background in business.
But I mean, Smith, was it that, when I had graduated from college and I had a few friends who had those analyst jobs, I mean, they were like the hardest drinking people I knew. I mean, we would stay up till 6 a.m. and they would go to work, and I would puke on the sidewalk and then get on the train back to Locust Valley. But like, was that like your experience at Smith Barney, or were you?
Oh yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, it wasn't like that every night, but we would absolutely go out, and I had my drinking buddies at work, and,
right.
It was a little bit like, overgrown, frat boy
right.
scene. And we drank hard, and we'd go back to work, and, you'd pull all-nighters and this and that. And right. It was pretty ridiculous. But again, you're 22 and
right.
you're invincible.
Yeah. And then, so where'd you go to business school?
So I went to the University of Chicago.
Right. Wow. So how was that?
I mean, that was amazing. I mean,
really?
Well, just like, you're getting taught by Nobel Prize winners.
Right.
Chicago has more, Nobel Prize winners in economics than any other school. And, but the thing about business school is like, there's not so much work that you can't party every night.
Right.
You've been in the working world. And so if you treat your studies sort of like a job, like right. I'm going to be either in class, and the classes don't meet that often. So I basically would work from like 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. every day. Right. And that was plenty to get your work done.
Yeah. Yeah. Sure.
But now you're 27, and it's not so funny when you're shit-faced.
It's not so funny, but I mean, who's judging you?
Chicago PD.
Oh, did you get arrested?
No, but I did some things that absolutely warranted arrest.
Right. Like what?
I thought, all these kids are so serious. We're going to inject a little fun into this culture.
Right.
So I had the brilliant idea, like, let's introduce beer pong to business school, because no one was playing any beer pong. And so basically we'd roll the kegs out on a Friday afternoon, like classes were done at noon on Fridays. Right. So we'd roll a keg out at 12:30 and be shit-faced by 2.
And was there like a campus life? I mean, were you living in dorms, or are you living in?
You didn't really live in dorms. People live sort of all over the city of Chicago. Right. You just go down to the school for your classes.
Right. Sure.
But there were these beautiful lawns, and we basically roll some tables out, and we sort of constructed a makeshift beer pong table.
Right.
I basically got 2 pieces of plywood, and we did a net, and we started playing.
Sure.
And, like I'd lose track of time, and my car would get booted,
right.
Because I'd park in an illegal spot. And,
sure.
So one time I was taking the table, back to my apartment. It was basically these 2 pieces of plywood, and I would be driving up Lakeshore Drive.
Right.
And I had the pieces of plywood on the top of my car, like with string. And one time I was driving along Lakeshore Drive, and the thing snapped, and it basically, like a sail, just went shooting up into the air, like in the middle of Lakeshore
Oh,
Drive.
that's the worst. That's my nightmare.
That could have landed on someone's car.
I'm amazed.
I probably had 8 or 9 beers in me at that point.
Yeah. And did you get stopped or anything? Or like you just,
no,
did you just
lucky.
like run for your life, or did you try to stop and put it back on your car?
It was too late. It was too late. I mean, that's just not it's a highway. You can't stop on a highway.
I mean, I drive my kids around with their like mountain bikes on my whatever on the bike rack, and I still like I did so much dumb shit like that when I was drinking that I it stresses me out so much. I feel guilty, like I'm gonna get arrested or this bike is gonna fall, like I'm gonna kill someone with this bike every single time I do it. It's like post-traumatic stress.
Yeah, but you multiply that by 1,000 of just all the little lapses in judgment. Totally. It's like when you're a drunk, you're like so shocked when these bad things happen to you.
Right. It just feels like bad luck. It feels like injustice. It feels like karmic retribution. It feels like nothing's going your way, when really all that's happening is you're just drinking too much. You know, it's like people are like, well, how's your life different since you stopped drinking? I'm like, well, I go to the emergency room a lot less. And it's not like I ever was in the emergency room for anything big, but I would like cut my finger, cooking. Like I just don't do that anymore. Or like whatever. I'd just be like hungover and trying to like fix something with like a kitchen knife and then like, slice my wrist and be like, oh Jesus.
Well, and on the surface you think, well, that could happen to anybody. You just cut your finger.
Right.
But like who's to say, that's not your fault too.
It totally. And like but then you 10 years sober and it's like, wow, I weirdly haven't had to go to the emergency room once. Whereas I would go like every couple of years when I was drinking. So,
yeah.
So
it was business school where like the cost started really mounting up.
Yeah. And how did that like in what way? Like you just didn't feel good?
Oh, well, I mean, your body changes, so you can't recover as fast. The hangovers are longer. You can see that like, what's the next stupid goddamn thing that's going to happen to me?
Right. Totally.
But I kept going, I kept going. I kept drinking for at least another 3 years. So I graduated from business school, hadn't really paid any serious consequences, working. I never lost a job because of alcohol, but I mean, alcohol certainly didn't enhance my performance.
Sure.
And, so then I met my girlfriend, who's now my wife of 19 years.
Wow.
I met her pretty shortly after I got back to New York from business school. And
did you have a job to come back to in New York?
I did.
You're coming back to Smith Barney?
No, I went to Credit Suisse.
And did they pay for your business school?
No.
Fuck them.
Yeah, seriously. No, but again, that's like sort of part of the gratitude. It's like my dad paid for that too.
Nice. Wow.
So I'm an associate at an investment bank, which is,
what did your dad do for work? Was he an investment guy too?
He was an investment guy. I mean, he worked for Oppenheimer. He was basically a broker.
Right. Sure.
Essentially, retail brokerage / private client.
Right. Sure.
And, did reasonably well. And it seemed
like that was a good gig in the day. I mean, is that still a good gig?
I mean, I think a lot less so.
Right. But if you get the right sort of band of clients, I suppose you can.
Well, let's put it this. Yeah, let's put it this way, Nick. It's like, the Racket Club used to be like half full of these institutional sales guys who didn't do shit. I mean, they literally like answered their phones and like Fidelity would be like, yeah, we need another, 20 million of the bonds.
500,000 shares. Yeah. Get it.
And then they'd be drinking, by 4:00.
Yeah. Those guys, I went out with those guys, man. Whew, they drank a lot.
But all those guys are gone because they've basically been replaced by computers.
Right.
As they should have been, frankly.
Yeah.
So, I keep going along and I'm drinking.
And what's the job at Credit Suisse? Is sort of like another analyst type job, or is it?
Well, yeah, you're an associate. It just means you're, you're just one
senior analyst type thing, right?
Same thing.
Right.
And, but the drinking is, doesn't get any better. And for me, it was mainly beer.
Right.
I wasn't really drinking hard alcohol all the time. But, I would do really bad things. I would like drink alone,
Right.
like the party would be over and I'd keep drinking,
Sure.
like at home. I drink for stupid reasons. Like I drink watching TV
Right. Sure.
on a fucking Tuesday,
Yeah.
like staying up till 3 a.m, drinking a 12 pack of beer.
Right.
And, that didn't serve me well. And frankly, the last straw, I was dating my wife, Val, and, we had moved in together.
Right.
And there was one night, it was like a Wednesday, where just as I said, I was like just staying up watching TV, drinking. And it got to be like 4 a.m, and I threw up in the bathtub. And I threw up all over some of her, her mother's towels.
Right.
Which I didn't know had real sentimental value to her.
Right.
And after I threw up, I just sort of passed out. And in the morning, Val just was screaming at me.
Right.
Like, what the fuck is wrong with you? Like, just, and it was the weirdest thing. I just sort of knew it was over.
Right. That's amazing. Cause like,
it wasn't, yeah.
I feel like there's so many guys in your position who are like still puking on their wives' towels every night. It's still getting yelled at. It's been going on for like 15 years and they're still like, I'm not sure like why she's so mad at me.
Why is she such a bitch?
Why is she such a bitch? I'm like, I'm so much better than most dudes. I pay for all this.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's just a huge cost to carry around.
I mean, I guess, yeah. I mean, like, the reality is if you're like puking in your tub at 4 a.m, like things aren't going well.
Right.
I mean, and I think like people get themselves convinced that actually is a way to live, and that it's fine. But I mean, it is, but you tend to die you die earlier from that. And, it's really not much of a life, and, you're lucky.
You can't see it while you're in it. That you can't see it while you're in it.
Totally.
And you rationalize everything. Of course, I just, whatever. Okay. So I drank too much and I threw up a little and I didn't clean up after myself and whatever your rationalization, but like,
Right.
you're like, and I just knew, like, I don't know. I just, I didn't try to quit. And actually I didn't even know for sure that I was quitting.
Right. Interesting.
I didn't say, okay, that's it, I'm quitting. I just stopped. And then one day turned into 2 days.
Right.
And then I just kind of proceeded down this path. And I was like, maybe that was it. Maybe I'm done.
And did you get help along the way? I mean,
yeah. So I basically went into therapy.
Right.
I had a counselor and
was he someone who specialized in recovery or no?
No.
And did you guys talk about alcohol and the sort of insidious nature of it in therapy, or was it more just sort of like get James's head healthy and having to drink will be less of an issue?
I think it was probably more the latter. Like, I don't really remember exactly what we talked about. It was 20 years ago now.
Sure. Wow.
But I'm sure I talked about my parents. I'm sure I talked about my childhood. I'm sure I talked about, difficult things. And I just needed someone to talk to.
Sure.
And
that helped. That guy.
I don't know. I don't remember. I mean, gosh, therapists aren't hard to find.
Sure.
But again, it wasn't, but it was very much ending with a whimper, not with a bang.
Sure. And did you find your life changed because of it?
Well, yes. I mean, I shudder to think what my life would have been if I had
Right.
kept drinking. I mean, there are a couple of things I know for sure. Like there's just no way I would have remained married.
Right.
There's no way. There's no way.
How soon after you stopped drinking did you guys get married?
Pretty soon after, actually. So I stopped in August of 2001, strangely enough, before 9/11.
Right.
It was like a month before 9/11. We had no idea this was going to happen. And
Were
then,
you guys in Manhattan for 9/11?
yeah,
Right.
yeah. And we got married the following year in May of 02.
It wasn't tempting to drink during 9/11?
Not that I remember.
Huh, that's interesting.
Not that I remember.
Were your offices or your house near the epicenter?
We were in Midtown.
Right.
We were in Midtown. But I mean, as you know, the first 6 months of recovery are are pretty fragile.
Yeah, they're kind of fragile, but they're also kind of, I mean, there's kind of wonderful too in that respect. And that, like, everything seems, everyone talks about this pink cloud, like everything seems kind of new and fresh. And, there is this like, I guess, excitement about like doing things sober, that you've never gone through before. I mean, I wouldn't, think of a major terrorist attack as being one of those. That's the kind of thing where you're like, oh God, how did you make it through that? Without drinking. I mean, I also think like like planning and participating in a wedding is like a really hard thing to make it through without drinking. Especially because there's like constant champagne and like everyone's toasting, like rehearsal dinners. The idea of like going through all of that, without drinking is interesting. I mean, how was that?
Well, I mean, what I remember is forming new habits. I mean,
Right.
really, and one of the hardest things, as you know, is like knowing what to say to people when they're up your ass.
Right.
In social situations. And like, it wasn't always elegant. Sometimes I'd be like, I'm not fucking drinking. All right. Like,
totally. Like, why do you care so much? Like, why can't you just shut up? Like, I've said no 3 times. Leave me alone.
Yes. So in the beginning, like, you don't have your stock answers. You don't know how to handle these situations. And so it's not always, but I don't know. I guess I sort of drew on that sort of natural disagreeableness that I have.
It's funny because like in like in AA, there is like so much of the like training is really about like keeping your side of the street clean and not worrying about the other person's side of the street. And like that to me has been so helpful, like so many times where I'm in situations like that, like just recognizing that like this isn't my problem. Like I can say no 1,000 times. It doesn't matter. Like I'm being true to myself and true to like, what I want out of life. And it doesn't matter how uncomfortable it makes everyone else. And I like,
Yeah.
I fucking needed to learn, like also to find consolation in that because like, that it's fine. Like, it's like, that's actually like, not necessarily a noble thing to do, but like a perfectly healthy thing to do, to take care of yourself first and rather than everyone else's fucking feelings around you.
Yeah. It's really hard in the beginning.
Yeah.
Because you don't want to bite someone's head off.
Right.
But people do get up in your grill.
Yeah. And also you're like, I fucking want to drink, like, there is a part of you that's like, as much as I don't want to drink, I also really would love a drink if for no other reason than it would get you to shut the fuck up,
Right. And that's the other thing, to say is like, sometimes you can't be naive and say that there aren't costs to giving it up. I mean, you pay a price for quitting too. Like, I'm not as, I'm not as fun at parties.
Right.
And there is something that you miss about that sometimes.
I think so. I mean, I tend to leave parties pretty early, and I have very little patience for the long goodbye. I'm like, does your wife still drink?
Yeah.
Right.
Not a lot.
My wife still drinks, not a lot, but like she'll be at a party and like she'll be whatever, 4 glasses of wine in, and I'm like, no, I'm leaving right this second. Like, and if it doesn't happen, like we will have a fight. Like I have gotten into some ugly fights at parties where I'm like, like just fucking take an Uber. Like I'm so done. Like you can stay here as long as you want, but don't make me fucking be a part of it.
Yeah.
Um, and then you know, it's I mean, like this life you've led is like when it's like a life I really imagined for myself. Like it really is like one of the like certainly what I had imagined it was going to be. Like I was going to be an analyst on Wall Street, and I was always a little apprehensive about going to business school. Like I don't know how that would have I never got, I guess, that deep into my imagination of how this life would play out. But like I was so sort of envious of the like the the seeming structure of that life, the sort of clearish kind of path, and the financial security of it, and the sort of respectability, the sense of self you get from like, I'm a fucking Wall Street analyst. And I wonder, I realize that's a naive approach, but I wonder if that has been your experience. Like, have you enjoyed it? Have you enjoyed this life that I might have led?
I think it's
As the
a
other
really interesting
smart kid in
question.
my class, like, it's really interesting to me. Like you took this path, like you remind me of myself. You lived a life that I really could have imagined myself leading. And like, I'm constantly asking myself, as I said at the beginning of our conversation, like, what would have happened had I done it? It sounds like it would have worked out well.
It's a fascinating question. I can tell you a couple of things. I mean, I've lived a very conventional life given our background.
Right.
Going to Wall Street is not like the most creative thing in the world. I did not take a lot of risks. It has not been a smooth and clear path. Like I've lost jobs like repeatedly.
Right.
Like Wall Street is not all that. It's not like, here, come to Wall Street. Here's your big bag of money.
Right.
But I guess I'd say I've enjoyed the challenge.
Right.
Like I never had any particular talent.
Right.
Like I was pretty equally, like I liked math and I also liked, the
Right.
humanities. I was pretty well-rounded. And Wall Street's actually pretty good for that, because even
Right.
though in the early years it's very quantitative, like, at my level, it's, you're dealing with people all the time. And I saw value in the house and the picket fence and the two kids and the dog and people do that for a reason, because it's pretty fulfilling.
Totally.
Every individual life is full of challenges. I mean, no matter what, nobody's immune to the tragedy of life. Maybe I didn't answer whether you would have been happy.
Like I've literally said to myself, like, I think if only my name had been James, I would have been like, I almost named one of my kids James, like thinking like, oh, it seems like and I don't know if that's like projecting on you specifically, though certainly you've always, maintained some place in my imagination of like, oh, because I saw so much of myself in you when we were growing up. And it's interesting we both ended up sober. That's sort of surprising. And not surprising, because it makes so much sense. I think we're both pretty rational people. I always saw myself as being fairly well-rounded as well. Like, it's one of the challenges of coming to Hollywood. Like, well, like you're not like I'm not a kind of a pointy person. Like, it's not like, oh, you're I'm a great this or that. And so like so much of my career has been trying to sort of like actually develop those things, which is really, it didn't even start until I was sort of sober. But and so what are you doing now? Like, what's the gig at this point?
So I still work in investment banking, and I basically what I do is I work with companies when they want to buy another company or sell the company or raise capital. And you're dealing with CEOs, and
Right.
My industry is healthcare. So I
Right.
might be working on hospitals or nursing homes or diagnostic labs or You know, I'm actually doing a beauty products deal now, which is not really healthcare, but and so I think it's interesting work. It's challenging.
And what does your in like if a healthcare company is going to buy another healthcare company, like what is your role in that?
We basically make it happen. I mean, let's say you're selling a company. I mean, like we're selling a company right now. You know, you organize materials telling investors all about the company. You manage the negotiations. You identify the people who might want to buy the company you're representing. You contact them. You negotiate with them. You set a price. You deal with the lawyers to get it through closing. So it's a little bit like being a real estate agent for companies.
And do you also provide financing?
We do not. My
Right.
firm does not. I mean, some banks do.
Right.
We'll act as your agent. So
right.
we'll
To find the money. Right.
Yeah, we'll go find the money for you for a fee.
It's funny. Carl Icahn used to do stand-up comedy. I don't know if you knew that.
No way.
But you can actually Google. At least you used to be able to Google. I was at a party and Jamie Niven, who was on this podcast, introduced me to Carl Icahn. Just, what a crazy world to begin with. But he was like, Jamie was like, please, you guys are the two funniest people at this party. You should meet. And then I went and Googled it, and there was he's like at Caroline's, which is a comedy club in New York. I've never been, but and he's doing bits about Leon Black. And he's really, and how Leon Black keeps coming to him, and he's like, it's not enough money. And Carl Icahn's like, you're getting $20 million. I mean, you're not doing anything. Like, what are you talking about? It's not enough money. And it's not really actually that funny, except like it's so wild to like see Carl Icahn on stage with a mic in his hand. And I mean, that's really what I'm headed for. Is I'm going to become a leverage buyout king. I'm just going to
right
take this same path that Carl Icahn was on.
Right, you're just the reverse of Carl Icahn. That's bizarre. That's funny.
So well, that's interesting. That's cool.
So I mean, frankly, in terms of the drinking, it's like the other thing I'd say is I don't do AA. And look, I mean, I have nothing but the highest respect for AA. AA has saved probably millions of people's lives, no doubt about it.
Sure.
One of the reasons I didn't do it is I found something that kind of worked. Like therapy just kind of like worked, and I never looked back.
Right. Sure.
And people were like, well, you got to go to meetings and you got to do that. And to me, I was like, I don't want to this is like the first time I've ever told my story about drinking.
Sure.
Like, I don't want to relive it. I don't want to sort of pick at the scab. And that's sort of like the thing I don't like about AA is just, there's an element of atonement in AA where it's like, you're always this close to relapsing.
Right.
And you're living with it like this thing around your neck. And I want to put it more behind me and be like, look, I used to be a fucking alcoholic.
Right.
Like, seriously, but I'm not anymore. I'm like really not.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, I did a joke. I don't know I'm sure you saw that bit of stand-up I did where that was the joke, where it's like, I'm fucking 3 years sober and I still have to call myself an alcoholic. Like, what the fuck?
Right. And you're being told that by someone who's like, 7 drinks in.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, it's really good that you fixed up, you solved your shit, Nick.
Totally. No, I think that's an interesting approach. I mean, AA in Los Angeles is so, I mean, I've met so many interesting people who are so sophisticated and really at the, the sort of very top of their field or their craft or their art or whatever it is. And like, I've been lucky to be able to sit in these rooms and have sort of like philosophical conversations with people who are, well out of my league, people who wouldn't give me the time of day in a normal circumstance, who will give me an hour, and that sort of benefit for me of like, getting to hear people's experiences and, through addiction, but also just through life and through, sort of making sense of, that sort of 12-step paradigm and, taking it sometimes out of, the language of recovery into their own language, like, like Russell Brand. I've been in a bunch of meetings with him, and he's like written a book called Recovery, where he, sort of takes the 12-step book and puts it into just sort of layman's terms for like any problem that you're struggling with. And it's been really life expanding for me in a way that is beyond my struggles with drugs and alcohol, and whatever other self-destructive behaviors I'm inclined toward. So, and it's interesting. I mean, I think like I have other friends certainly who have like gone that route where, it's really been therapy that's kind of saved them, or maybe they've had a specialist who's sort of helped guide them, toward a life of recovery. And I'm sure, maybe that would have been my case had I not just like stumbled into AA and been like, wow, this is amazing. But
I mean, I think AA is one of the most successful organizations in history, frankly.
Yeah,
and
it must
the other thing I would say about AA, the only thing that kind of drives me nuts is higher power.
Right. Sure.
And it's like people, I think people are so close. And the other thing that's transpired in my life is I've actually, I'm a Christian.
Right.
And I've really embraced my faith.
Right.
And I feel like people, when they talk about their higher power, they are so close. They are so close to taking that one step and calling that higher power God.
Sure.
And I'm not going to hijack your show with an, evangelical.
No, it's totally interesting.
But it's like, where is this reluctance and this resistance? So it's like you're describing something that sort of stands outside of time and space, that is immensely powerful, that is, timeless and has influence over all events. Yet you can't call it God. And then they're like, well, whatever you want to call it. I feel like people are so close to making. I've heard you talking about sort of a version of faith, and I want to like just push you over the edge now.
I mean, the thing is, I grew up a Catholic, and I went to Episcopalian school. We studied Paul Tillich. I went to a Catholic school. I studied tons of Christian Catholic philosophers, and and I think, look, I'm not the most versant in AA doctrine or whatever. So I'm like, I think they do call it God, don't they? I mean, obviously everyone says higher power, but they also say we turned our will over to the power of God as we understood him, is the sort of the third step. And, I think, obviously a lot of people have these like horrible relationships with religious institutions. And so I think that a lot of the reason why they go to higher power is to, take whatever prejudice or stigma people come to that place with out of the equation, so that people can like use a different terminology and then also, come to their own, I guess, understanding of it. I mean, it's funny, for me, I've talked about it. I talk about it all the time that like it's weird. I had this experience very recently, which I don't think I've talked about, where I was really stressed about something. I can't remember what it was even. I think it may have been like work related. It's just about my career. I was like, oh, I'm never going to make it. Like, I'm going to die before I make, like, I'm running out of time. Like, I'm running out of time. And, I work in an ageist business. It's not an unrealistic fear, I don't think. I'm getting older and uglier. My brain doesn't work as well. I'm not as funny or sharp or witty. And I was lying in bed and I was just like losing my mind about it. Like, am I going to have enough money see this thing through, like my kids and whatever, normal midnight musings. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to take all this bundle of fear and I'm going to do what they do in recovery is I'm going to turn it over to God. I'm going to let God worry about this. And I'm not just going, which is what I usually do. I'm like, oh, whatever. This is all the chaos that I don't control and it's beyond my control. So I don't need to, why should I worry? What, me worry? Because it's beyond me. But then I went one step further and I was like, I'm actually going to put faith in God that he's going to work on these problems for me. I'm going to sleep now and I'm turning this over to God and I'm actually going to assume that he cares and that he is going to take care of me. And I went right to sleep. And I was like, it was a real interesting thing because I very, very rarely am able to get to a point of faith. I think it was what one would call it, faith that God actually is going to care about me. Like, I think like I take a lot of solace in God's indifference because then I'm not going to be punished for my transgressions and I'm not I'm not in control and like, so I can just like do my work and focus keeping on my side of the street clean. And then God will sort it out and maybe I'll come out on top. Maybe I won't, but at least I won't be able to blame myself for it, you know?
Yeah.
And it was really like revelatory to think to like actually believe for a split second that God was going to work on my behalf. And then I went to sleep. But I mean, I haven't worked at all since then to try to get back to that place. I hope he's still at work on this stuff because, you know, I'm counting on that. But I wonder, like, you know, it's interesting talking to you because you're not like, obviously you're not like sort of steeped in this same terminology, but like, have you found that like your faith has been a kind of I'm going to use the word sucker? Like, has it calmed you? Has it
not in the like
no, yes. The other, it's
the fancy version of sucker.
Yes, the fancy version, because it's the only word that comes to mind that
I'll try to let me give you like, first of all, in the schools that we went to, St. Paul's, Andover, Georgetown, Williams, like even Georgetown, which is a Jesuit institution, like Christianity never even gets a hearing, like as a plausible idea. I mean, maybe at Georgetown.
At Georgetown, it's a big deal. I mean, okay. Partly because the student body is 50% Catholic, and then partly because there's Jesuit teachers, and like they force you to take a course called The Problem of God while you're there. And I happen to have a great teacher, Diane Yeager, who like made us actually read Christian, you know, we read real Christian thinkers and literature, and it was
that's great.
Yeah, it was
that's great. I mean, look, you know, for me, believing in God was always easy in the sense that like you just like look around. It's like you think you think all this is an accident. You know, like people would be like, well, science. Well, like, what do you think? Like science was only invented 500 years ago, first of all, you know, and like if you believe in the Big Bang, like, okay, well, what caused the Big Bang? And so to me, I mean, that's what's called natural theology. There's just something about the created world that makes God's presence manifest to us. So that was easy. And then it got to a point where I was like, you know, I think I know all these things about the Bible, but I've never even read the Bible.
Right.
You know, so you actually, you know, you start reading it. You start with the four gospels, you know, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And those are biographical accounts of the life of Jesus.
Right.
You know, and even the book of Luke like starts off being like, look, we're writing this down because you're not going to believe the shit that happened here. Like, I'm paraphrasing.
Right. Yeah.
You know, and the other thing that what really dropped for me was the idea like there's really no neutral ground in life. You know, like you're taught to be a skeptic. You're taught to be a critic, you know, of like, well, I can't, you know, I don't believe in organized religion, you know, like, well, all religions have kind of like an element of truth. And you think you're occupying this kind of neutral, safe space where you don't have to really commit to anything. And it just occurred to me, it's like, that's okay when you're a 19-year-old sophomore in college, but it's like, do you really want to live like that when you're 50? Like everybody lives for something.
Sure.
And for me, it got to the point where it was like, well, like, what's the highest and best thing I could base my life on? And that's God. Pure and simple.
It's interesting. I mean, I guess when I think what is the highest example I could base my life on, I think it's Jesus. And then I get to this point of like, well, then I have to give away all of my worldly possessions and I have to go minister to the poor. And I'm frankly not ready for it. Like, I mean, maybe at some point.
I don't know if
in my
that's the
life.
logical conclusion of that, though.
Okay.
I
mean, I hope it's not. But there is a part of me, and part of me is, there is this part of me that is all or nothing. That I try to like find some middle ground, but like, I mean, I don't come anywhere near, even on a daily basis, of like I'm not a bad person, but I'm not like, I feel like there's so much more I could do.
Right.
When I think of like what a Christian life would look like.
Well, I mean, you start with the premise that we're all broken.
Sure.
And the other thing is, being a Christian is not just about being nice to people. Like that's just like the shallowest form. I mean, God wants us to use our talents in whatever form we have them.
I guess I don't think of it as being nice. I think of it as being of service.
That's why so many people are actually living as Christians. They just don't even know it.
No, I agree. And so I guess I feel like, well, what's the harm of that? Like, what's the benefit of giving it a Christian terminology? Like, if, I mean, it's like as a member of AA, I go to these meetings, we talk about the service, we talk about God. It's a lot of that is, all in the name of like sustaining recovery. But I'm like, it's basically, in my mind, I'm like, yeah, I go to church once a week, like,
I think that's what you're doing.
Yeah. And like, my wife during, COVID started a meditation practice. And I'm like, oh, she's going to church every day. That's good. She needs it. That's good for her. I mean, and when I say like she needs it, I don't mean that pejorative. We all need it. Like, I mean, I really wish that, one thing that I think is great that sort of comes out of like Christian traditions and is like a sense of community, a sense of being part of something that's bigger than your own little world, that you can, that gives you a sort of a practical place to actually be of service. You can go to your church and do shit there for other people,
Yep.
And that's the way AA works. You can go there and do shit for other people, and it's really easy. And it makes you feel good. And that's, all those things are great.
Yeah. I mean, being Christian is not about, eating fish on Friday. And it's like, there are things that are more important than others, and like, I think the reason it makes a difference is because I think the idea of God is relational,
right.
And the idea that God wants to have a relationship with each individual, and it's not just some impersonal force, like gravity. It's like, no, like God knows you and wants a relationship with you.
I mean, I find that very hard to believe. I'm not denying that it's possible. And like, it's funny, I had this woman on here a couple weeks ago named Connie Clotworthy, and she talked about meditation as an opportunity to just listen for God. Like, I'm going to sit here and check in with God. I'm not going to meditate when I'm stressed out, or I'm not going to meditate when I'm, in a state of crisis. I'm just going to do it every day to see like what's going on with God. And I'm like, wow, that's so amazing. It's such a healthy sort of approach to the whole thing. I mean,
that's prayer. That's prayer.
That's prayer. Totally.
That is prayer. It is lifting your mind and your heart to God.
Well, there we go. I mean, Jesus Christ, look at us.
I don't,
who would have thought from like, crashing cars into telephone poles in front of the Piping Rock Club that we would come to having a sophisticated conversation about the meaning of God.
Yeah. Well, Nick, I really appreciate you having me. And I think your show is great.
No, thank you. Thank you for being on. I would love to have you on every week, and we could, sort of debate the meaning of God and Christ and service and the purpose of life. It's really great to be back in touch with you.
Anytime. There's more where that came from. I mean, faith is a journey, and it's not something I went looking for. It's just something that like finds you.
Thanks for listening. You can support this podcast at patreon.com/thedrunkalogs.